Hello and welcome back to Kaleidoscope, your chance to wrestle with big questions about sexuality, gender and faith. And this is the episode I bet loads of you have been waiting for. In this episode, we're going to get practical.
So far, we've laid some foundations, some core beliefs that are really helpful in understanding a Christian perspective on sexuality and gender. Then last episode, we saw how human sexuality is meant to be a signpost. It's pointing to something bigger than itself, the biggest love story ever told, the relationship between God and his people. And that's a union that we get to be a part of if we choose to follow Jesus.
But we know what you're probably thinking. What's that mean for us today? How should we live in light of that? That is what this episode is going to be all about. Episode 3, living out gospel sexuality.
We're going to see Jesus shows us 2 ways that we can live out our sexuality in faithfulness to him. Those are marriage and singleness. To kick us off, we're going to hear some real life stories of marriage and singleness. Meet our friends Sean, Gaby and Eleanor.
Eleanor's story, episode 3, take 1.
Woohoo! Okay, my name's Eleanor. I live in Leamington Spa. I spend my spare time looking after a massive garden, watching Formula One, supporting football team, Sheffield Wednesday, if that's okay to say. I've always been single. I wanted to meet someone and get married. I never did. There were times when I fancied people. I asked people out. I asked this guy out when I was at college, and it just never quite happened. And it was when I was at a Christian conference that it all began to fall into place, really, where I was hearing people say things. And you know the way that sometimes people say something and everything that's said is like it hits you between the eyes and it's for you, even though you're in a room of thousands of people. And I felt like God was saying to me, it's okay to be single. I love you as you are. From that moment on, I felt able to be much more content as a single person. It wasn't that I never wanted to meet someone, but I could live a content, full life as I was. We can live a good life even if it's just us. The world around us tells us in some ways that we can't. Even when you watch a film, you'll see in a film that often there's a romantic interest, that someone will end up in a relationship, and it's almost like they can't be happy until they meet somebody else. But you can live a fulfilled and content life. I am a whole person. I don't need another half to make me a full person. Jesus himself was single, and he led a very full life in his 33 years. I think one of the ways that we can think that singleness can be very lonely is that we forget that the Bible says very clearly that friendship is really important. And friendship really is. It's something that can really speak into every aspect of our lives. And I do believe it's really important to have a mix of friends. So for me, having friends who are married, friends who are single, enables me to be part of people's lives, part of people's families, but also it means that I can speak into their lives as well, and helps us to have a much more rounded understanding of what life is about. So yeah, I think it's really important to have a real mix of friendships.
Let's say something more interesting then.
Fresh out of ideas now.
You like going to the gym?
Yeah, they won't believe that then. My name's Sean, I live in Bristol. I'm married to Gaby and we have 4 children. So I realised I was gay when I was about 16 years old, and I assumed I wouldn't get married to a woman. I was a Christian and had always believed that I shouldn't seek a same-sex partner. So it was very much to my surprise when in my 20s, having been friends with Gaby for several years, I started ending up developing feelings for her.
We were quite prayerful about things, and we wanted to seek out God's will as being the kind of foundation of our relationship. So that's where we started in prayer for a month, and then as we followed God's call, we felt that this was something that God was calling us to do, to kind of be together and to possibly get married. So that's how we started out.
People often ask us, are you kind of living a lie, or are you really attracted to her because of my sexuality? And of course, in any relationship, your feelings for each other go up and down, and over time, that's a very natural kind of healthy kind of normal part of any relationship. What doesn't change is that we always love each other and are committed to each other and choose, and that's something you have to choose in any marriage, in any relationship every day.
Even when the other person is really annoying. I think for us, marriage is a commitment first and foremost, and it doesn't matter whether the person is same-sex attracted or opposite-sex attracted. Once you've committed into the relationship and we made our vows before God when we got married, then that was it as far as we were concerned.
Of course, what does really matter is that you do have love and feelings, including attraction to the person that you're married to and that you're committing to. And the other thing that's so important is for you to be completely honest with each other about how you're feeling and about what is going on for you.
But also, once you're committed to somebody, you've chosen to love them for the rest of your life. And so for us, that's a really important part of it, because feelings come and go. But for us, it's really important that we continue to choose to love one another.
Marriage is probably one of the most challenging things that we've done, and I think we both say that. And actually, any marriage, all marriages have that challenge. You have to work at it. It's not easy, but actually, anything worthwhile in life is hard work, and you have to kind of persevere. But it's also been one of the most wonderful joys and blessings in our life as well.
Absolutely.
I often cry at weddings, always at one particular point at the start of the service. The guests have arrived, the groom is standing at the front of the church, and everyone waits for the big moment, the arrival of the bride. When she arrives, the congregation falls silent. Everyone stands up, music plays, and she makes her way down the aisle. At that point, every eye is on the bride, but I always take a quick glance at the groom. Some grooms are grinning ear to ear. Others are smiling and crying at the same time. Some are proper ugly crying. All of them are overwhelmed with joy and love. That moment always makes me cry. But my tears aren't the tears of a lonely single person or a jealous friend. They're tears of excitement and tears of joy. The reason I cry at weddings is because I'm seeing a picture of my future wedding. I'm reminded that one day I will be married to Jesus as part of his bride, the church. And when I see the love and joy on the face of a groom seeing his bride, I'm reminded of how Jesus feels about me. Weddings remind me of the story of gospel sexuality that we explored in our last episode. How our human experience of sexuality is a picture and a signpost to the greatest love story ever told, the love story between Christ and the church. But maybe you were left with some questions after hearing that story in the last episode. What does that story actually mean for us and our sexualities in the here and now? What are we supposed to do with that story? That's what this episode is about.
Here's the headline. The Bible shows us that there are two ways we can live out our sexualities in faithfulness to Jesus to tell that gospel story. Those two ways are sex in marriage and celibacy, which means not having sex, in singleness. There's a story about Jesus where he explains this. It's recorded in Matthew's Gospel, one of the biographies of Jesus in the New Testament. It's a high-stakes story. Jesus is being quizzed by some of the Jewish leaders who want to get him in trouble. They try to think of a complex and controversial topic, and the topic that they land on is divorce. But Jesus isn't caught out by their question. He answers and he takes them back to creation, to God's good plan. He talks through what marriage is really meant to be. Here's what Jesus says in Matthew 19. Haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Now, I know you might feel that for you, the possibility of marriage is a long way off. Maybe marriage isn't really something you think about or think you need to think about. But understanding what Jesus says about marriage helps all of us to understand how God calls us to live out our sexuality, whatever our age or relationship status. This is important for all of us. So what does Jesus say God's design for marriage is? He says 4 things.
First, Jesus says marriage is meant to be lifelong. It's supposed to last until one of the 2 people die. Marriage isn't a temporary contract you keep so long as it's making you happy. It's not like following someone on social media where you can just unfollow them if they annoy you or you get bored of them. God's plan is that marriage is a lifelong commitment. Second, Jesus says it's a relationship that is exclusive to 2 people. He says the 2 will become one flesh. Marriage is 2 people faithful to each other, not committing to anyone else in the same way or engaging in sexual activity with anyone else. And third, marriage is meant to be a sexual relationship. That's part of what it means to become one flesh. God created sex. He says it's good. Sex doesn't make God uncomfortable. But here's something really important we also need to know. In God's design, sexual contact and activity are meant to be reserved for marriage. They're only right in the context of a marriage between a husband and a wife. Now, that's a controversial statement, right? You won't find many people saying that today, and it can be a lot to get our heads around. So let me give you a few reasons why the Bible says that. For starters, there's the simple reality that sex between a man and a woman often produces, and is designed to produce, babies. And the best place for a baby to be brought up is with a mum and a dad, even though for lots of reasons that isn't always possible. Then there's the fact that sex does something. Did you know that? Sex unites people together. As Jesus says, 2 become one flesh. Sex is powerful because it deeply connects those who engage in it. And because sex is powerful, it's also kind of dangerous. Anything powerful is dangerous if used wrongly. It's why you have to pass a driving test before you're allowed out on the roads on your own. Cars are powerful and dangerous, and so there are rules in place to keep us safe. God has reserved sex for marriage because the lifelong commitment of marriage is the only safe context in which to allow ourselves to be so deeply united to someone else. And a final thing, a really important one. The deep union created by sex is designed to be a picture of the deep union we can enjoy with God through Christ. It's part of that signpost we've been talking about. And the union we enjoy with God happens in the context of an eternal, exclusive relationship between Christ and the church. That's why the picture of that union is meant to be kept for the lifelong, exclusive union that is marriage. It's all about telling the story that sex is meant to tell, allowing sex to be the signpost God has designed it to be. The Bible teaches that marriage is the only right context for sexual contact and activity. You might find that shocking or strange, but it's not a pointless old-fashioned rule. It's part of God's plan to protect us from harm and to promote true happiness. You've probably already spotted one of the implications of this. It means that all other sex is sinful in God's eyes. It's rebelling against him and his plan. That would include sex before marriage, sex outside of marriage, pornography, lust, sexting, any sexual contact and activity that isn't between a husband and a wife. Lots of us are going to be feeling pretty uncomfortable right now. Lots of us, probably most of us, will know that we've already fallen short of God's plan for sex. But here's what we've got to remember. Sexuality is also about the gospel. And the good news of the gospel is that when we sin, when we fall short of God's ways, there is total and utter forgiveness available if we put our trust in Jesus. That doesn't mean it doesn't matter if we sin and we can just do whatever we want sexually, but it means we don't have to be crushed by guilt and shame for things we've done. And it means that we get to know Jesus' help to live God's way. If you know you've fallen short of God's standards when it comes to sex, don't be crushed by guilt and shame. Come to Jesus. Confess what you've done and ask for his forgiveness. The Bible promises that when we do that, Jesus is faithful to forgive. So marriage is a sexual relationship, and it's designed to be the only type of relationship that is sexual.
There's one more thing that Jesus tells us about marriage in Matthew 19, and this one may be even more controversial. Marriage is the union of a man and a woman. Jesus states this pretty explicitly. He says, "At the beginning, the Creator made them male and female and said, 'For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the 2 will become one flesh.'" Jesus says that marriage exists because God made us male and female, and then that a man and a woman unite as one flesh in marriage. There's no getting away from the fact that Jesus himself is saying that marriage is between one man and one woman. And that means it can't be between two men or two women. This is a point where we need to pause and take a deep breath. For lots of us, it's going to be difficult to hear and difficult to understand. For some people, including me and Andrew, it raises some really important questions about our own lives and sexualities. And that's why we're going to devote the whole of the next episode to same-sex sexuality. But there is one thing we can say here while we're talking about marriage. This doesn't actually mean that no gay people can get married. Marriage isn't denied to anyone, but marriage is the union of a man and a woman. Some people who experience same-sex attraction do find they develop attraction to one particular person of the opposite sex, and they can enter into marriage with that person. That's Sean's story, as we've heard, and his isn't a unique story. And that shouldn't be a huge surprise to us. We know that sexual fluidity, which is a changeableness in our sexual desires, that's a reality that many people experience to greater or lesser extents. But then there are some of us who don't experience any fluidity in our sexualities. That would be Andrew's story. We need to know what God's teaching on sexuality means for people like him who seem to be exclusively attracted to people of the same sex. It's also a question I have for myself, as someone who's experienced attraction to men, but overwhelmingly finds that my attractions are to other women. That's what we'll think about in the next episode, so keep a hold of those questions for then. Okay, that was a lot. Let's take a break and talk through what we've heard so far. We've just heard loads of stuff about marriage. I wonder if you were feeling like I've often felt when I hear Christians talk about marriage. That's great, but what about the single people like me? Christians haven't always been great at remembering that not everyone gets married. Us singles sometimes feel a bit forgotten and overlooked. I think Jesus would have known what that feels like too. He was single. But he doesn't overlook single people like me, and I love that. In Matthew 19, after talking about marriage, Jesus goes on to talk about singleness.
Singleness comes up in this story because when the disciples hear Jesus say that God's design for marriage means marriages should be for life, they think he's gone a bit too far. They think he needs to tone it down a bit. And so they say to him, if this is the situation between a husband and a wife, it's better not to marry. They think Jesus will say, oh yeah, you're right, I better change that bit. But he doesn't. Instead, Jesus doubles down. He basically says, yes, that's absolutely right. It is better not to marry. Perhaps to our surprise, Jesus and the Apostle Paul after him tells us that being single and not having sex is better than marriage and having sex in marriage. Yep, you heard that right. They say that not having sex and not being married is better. Confused? Surprised? Let's see what Jesus says.
Here are his words in Matthew 19. I'll give you a heads up that he uses a word we might not be used to hearing. He talks about eunuchs. A eunuch was a man who was unable to father children, and Jesus uses the term to talk about single celibate people. Here's what he says. For there are eunuchs who were born that way, and there are eunuchs who've been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it. So here's the shock moment. Jesus agrees with the disciples. It's good to remain single. That would have been shocking to those who first heard him, just as we probably find it a bit shocking today. Did you notice Jesus implies that singleness is a gift? He talks about those to whom it has been given. The Apostle Paul also uses gift language when he talks about singleness later in the New Testament. But we often misunderstand what that means. Jesus doesn't mean that the gift of singleness is like a special superpower. As much as I would love to believe that as a Christian single person I am a superhero, that's not actually what Jesus is saying. The gift is not a superpower that enables you to endure the otherwise awful situation of singleness. The gift is the fact of being single. It's the state of being single. Those who are single are experiencing the gift of singleness, just as those who are married are experiencing the gift of marriage. And this makes sense of what Jesus said. Did you notice that 2 of the types of eunuchs, or single people, that Jesus talks about didn't choose their singleness? For some, it's because of something true of them from birth. For others, it's because of something that happened to them in life. These aren't people who are single because they've been given the gift of a special superpower. They're people who are experiencing the gift of singleness because of their circumstances. The gift is the fact of being single, not a special power to endure singleness.
What Jesus has already said about marriage teaches us something else important about singleness. That singleness also means celibacy, not having sex. Because sexual contact and activity is reserved for marriage relationships as an outworking of God's good plan and design, those of us who are single are called not to engage in sexual activity. I wonder what you think about that. That might sound like a terrible idea, maybe even a dangerous idea. And don't adult humans need to be having sex to be happy and healthy? That's an idea you'll hear a lot in the world around us, but it's not true. I bet you know older single people who disprove the idea. And we've all got at least one good example who disproves the idea that sex is a need. Jesus. Jesus lived on earth as a human, like you and me, a sexual being, but one who is single and celibate for his whole life. Sex isn't a need, and Jesus' example shows us that. But I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't living some or maybe even all of your adult life as a single person mean you'd be lonely and isolated and missing out on love? That's another common belief in the world around us. Singleness equals loneliness, but that doesn't have to be true. And it shouldn't be true for any follower of Jesus. Sex and marriage aren't the only way God gives us to experience and express love and intimacy, or the only solution to loneliness. Friendship is also a vital form of relationship, vital for all people. That might sound crazy to you. Friendship is a poor substitute for sex and romance, surely. But the Bible shows us that friendship is meant to be a relationship of experienced and expressed love. In fact, Jesus says the greatest love can be seen between friends. He says this in John 15, "There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends." Usually, that self-sacrifice will be metaphorical rather than literal. But friendship is a context where we get to love and be loved through putting others first. God calls all of us to commit to and benefit from friendship. Friendship is one of God's greatest blessings to us, and friendship is one of the things that helps make being an adult who is single plausible. The example of Jesus shows us that, and I've experienced it in my own life. I'm in my early 30s, I'm single, I've always been single, but my life is not one of loneliness and lovelessness. My life is relationally rich, with multiple committed, loving friendships. One of the blessings of singleness is greater freedom to develop deep friendships with multiple people, as well as a greater freedom to develop deep friendship with Jesus. Here's the truth. We all need good friendships. We don't all need marriage or sex. And for all of us, including those who are single, friendship is a key context that God has given us to love and to be loved.
We are almost done, but there is one last important thing about singleness that you need to know. Singleness also tells the story of the gospel. It too is a signpost to Jesus. Singleness tells the same story in a different way. In eternity, when Christ and the church are united in an eternal marriage, no human will be married to another human. We'll no longer need the picture and the signpost when we're experiencing the reality and the destination. We will all be single then, corporately married to Jesus, but individually single. Being single now tells that story and points forward to that day. Singleness is also a signpost. It's a signpost to the eternal destiny of each individual Christian. I think that's pretty cool. So how do we live out the story of gospel sexuality? Jesus tells us there are 2 options, marriage and sex in marriage, or celibate singleness. Both are good. Both are gifts. Both tell the gospel story. Both are signposts to the future of God's people. You've listened to us, now it's your turn to do the talking. Here's a point to pause and discuss. What do you think?
I'm joined by Gaby, who we've already met in this episode, and James, who we haven't met. So James, can you just introduce yourself to us first?
Hi, I am James Brown. I am basically a youth pastor at a Baptist church in Walthamstow.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining us. Gaby, I want to start with you. We've heard some of your story. You're married to Sean, who's primarily same-sex attracted. How does that work?
Our marriage isn't any different from any other marriage. All marriages have difficulties, all marriages have disagreements, but because we've got Jesus at the centre of our marriage, he makes everything better. And to be honest, we've never had any issues about sexuality or discussions about that. Some of the biggest problems we've had are how to parent our children and normal things like who's cleaning the house and who's not cleaning the house.
We won't ask who tends to win those battles.
I'm not very clean.
Love it. James, you're single. How do relationships work in singleness, and the fact that you do need love and to be loved? How does that work for you in your life?
Yeah, I think it causes me to really find relational satisfaction in God. Praying on the move is great, but I think actually spending quality time with God is important. And I think my singleness facilitates that when I don't make too much of being around people. I feel like sometimes it can be a bit of an idol, like feeling the necessity to be out.
I was single until I was about 28, and I definitely felt there was a lot of pressure as I got older, particularly from the older generation, actually, grandparents saying, oh, so when are you going to get married? Like you could just suddenly snap up and, make someone appear out of nowhere. Well, actually, I thought I'd get married in 6 months' time. It just doesn't always happen like that. It doesn't happen when people expect it to happen. And actually, singleness is something that's really positive for the whole community, if done well and if supported. But actually, it can be quite sad when everybody's always asking you questions of, so when are you looking for a partner? Are you looking for someone? Maybe you should do this to your hair, or maybe you should do that. And it's just also unhelpful, really, isn't it?
Yeah, so often is. One of the things we've talked about in this episode is the importance of friendship for married people and single people. I'd love to hear about the significance of friendship in your life. How about you, Gaby? What role does it play in your life?
I think for us, we've been able to support other couples in a similar situation to us. So people are always kind of sidling up to us and going, well, actually, your story is a bit like ours. Apparently not every couple that looks like they're a straight married couple are a straight married couple. And so there's lots of different people have different perspectives on life, and they've had different experiences. And so therefore we've been able to befriend and walk with people who are in similar situations to us, who perhaps haven't had the courage to talk about it or to share about it. But friendships are really important, because even in a married relationship, you can't just have the two of you. You need a whole crew of people around you, particularly for parenting, but also just for life in general. It can be quite lonely to be in a marriage when there's just two of you, because you can get sick of the other person sometimes, as lovely as they are. Even Sean, yes.
What about for you, James? What kind of role does friendship play in your life?
I think particularly at university, I graduated a year ago, and I think that was a time where I really pressed in to my friendships, specifically my male friendships. And it seems like there's a problem amongst men to actually have real friendships. It seems like women are able to be quite vulnerable with each other quite naturally, or they've cultivated it at least. And I think I'm quite intentional about that with my male friends, especially with accountability and checking that they're doing okay, and really impressing the question are you really okay, or why is that decent versus I'm good, and just being quite curious.
A final thing I wanted to pick up on, maybe one of the most controversial things we've talked about in this episode is the fact the Bible says sex is to be reserved for marriage relationships. So those of us who aren't married shouldn't be having sex, and sex shouldn't take place outside of marriage. Just love to get your thoughts and feelings on that. How do you feel about the fact God says that? How's that impacted you?
I think it's really important to be committed to somebody, and actually committing to them before you're married and before you've even met them. So actually, I tried to be faithful to my potential married partner by not having sex before I'd even met him. And so for me, that was really important. So it was a while before I even knew who Sean was. But in my head, I had it, how should I be treating other people? And this person that I'm dating might not be my husband. And so therefore, I want to reserve sex for the time when I can be committed to this person full time, all the time in marriage.
I think sex is a really important thing, and we've kind of made it a casual thing. Casual sex is a bit of a dichotomy in my head, or like the two kind of don't go hand in hand. It's like the most vulnerable thing you can do, like being naked with another person, and we kind of don't treat it as that's not casual. Like me being naked is not casual with somebody who I'm not committed to, and even if I was committed to them, it's still not necessarily casual. And I think that's why it speaks about the marriage bed with such a sanctity, a holiness. It's set apart, it's different to other things, and I don't want that to be a casual thing, and isn't a casual thing in my thought process.
It's really helpful to hear that in both your different contexts, we see the wisdom, the good reasons why God says this, and it's ultimately for our good. All of us in different ways have fallen short of what the Bible says there.
Absolutely.
But wonderfully, there's forgiveness, there's freedom from shame, things we've done, things done to us. And so we have this wonderful good news, we're a parameter to protect us, but also a gospel of hope when, as we all do, we fall short of that.
We have a fresh start whenever we want one. We can ask the Lord to forgive us for the things that we've done wrong. But actually, it also means we can step forward in hope.
Brilliant. This has been such a helpful chat. Thanks so much, Gaby. Thanks so much, James.